Something is happening in Berea right now that I genuinely did not see coming at this speed, and I need to talk about it honestly before the noise drowns out what actually matters. Not the hot take version, not the agenda-driven version, the real version, because the Shedeur Sanders quarterback competition in Cleveland has reached a point where even the people who were most skeptical, the reporters and analysts who had every professional reason to pump the brakes, are no longer pumping the brakes. They are being moved by what they are watching. And when the skeptics start arriving at the same conclusion as the believers, that is not a narrative anymore. That is evidence accumulating past the point where resistance makes sense. Let me set the scene properly, because context is everything here. Since Sanders arrived in Cleveland, this story has had two distinct camps. The believers tracked his college tape, understood what his completion numbers actually meant in context, and have been saying for months that the talent is real. The skeptics kept redirecting the conversation back toward Deshaun Watson every time a positive practice report surfaced, treating every strong throw like an outlier that needed explaining away, finding reasons to qualify every good moment before it could build into something meaningful. I understood both sides. An open quarterback competition with two quarterbacks this different in profile and history was always going to generate competing narratives. That is just the nature of the situation. But the dynamic has shifted, and the shift is significant enough that I think it changes how we have to talk about this. The voices that were most resistant, the ones with no particular investment in Sanders succeeding, the reporters who were not in his corner and had no reason to get there, unless what they were watching demanded it, those voices are now saying he is winning this competition, not trending toward winning it, not positioned to potentially win it under the right circumstances, winning it right now. In the middle of OTAs and mandatory minicamp, in a setting that, as I am going to explain, is actually not even where his game reaches its ceiling. The people least motivated to say it are saying it. That means something real is happening on that practice field. I want to get specific about what has been reported because the details matter enormously, and I think the general conversation has been too vague about what exactly is standing out. The throws Sanders has been making are not just completing at a high rate. Completion rate in a spring practice setting, no pads, no live pass rush, structured repetitions, is genuinely not the most meaningful metric. You can complete passes at a high rate in that environment without showing anything that translates to real NFL competition. What the coaches and observers on the ground are specifically noting is placement, and placement is everything. There is a difference in football, a difference that separates quarterbacks who can function in a competition from quarterbacks who are actually winning one, between a ball that finds a receiver and a ball that finds a receiver in the only spot that matters, in a spot where the defender has no realistic play on it, where the receiver does not have to adjust his body, break his stride, or do anything except trust that the ball is arriving exactly where it needs to be. That is anticipation. That is a quarterback processing the coverage, making the decision, and executing it in a window that happens before most people watching can consciously register that the window opened. Sanders is doing that consistently, not in flashes, consistently, and the people watching every rep are noticing. The throw to Jalen Wallace that has been circulating in conversations among people covering this team, I want to sit with that one for a moment because it captures something important. Sanders takes the snap, moves through his read, identifies the developing route, and releases the ball with timing so precise that it arrives in rhythm. Not a beat early that forces Wallace to come back for it and gives the corner a chance to rally. Not a beat late that allows the safety rotation to develop and eliminate the window. Exactly on time. With the kind of conviction that tells you the decision was already made before the snap, that Sanders had already committed to where the ball was going and trusted that commitment completely. No hesitation, no happy feet, no patting the ball waiting for certainty that never fully arrives. Just a clean, decisive, accurate throw hitting the only spot it needed to hit. I have covered enough football to know what that kind of throw means. It does not come from repetition alone. You can run the route 1,000 times in practice and still have a quarterback who waits too long, second guesses the read, or releases the ball without real conviction. That throw to Wallace was not a guy going through motions he had memorized. It was a quarterback operating with clarity and confidence and a processing speed that puts him in a different category from most players competing for starting jobs in this league. And then there is the frozen rope to Denzel Boston, which has been described by multiple independent observers using almost identical language, and that consistency itself tells me something. When different people who watch the same throw independently reach for the same words to describe it, that usually means the throw was remarkable enough to demand that specific vocabulary rather than something more generic. A frozen rope is a specific thing. It is not just a hard throw. It is a throw where velocity and trajectory and accuracy are all operating simultaneously and at their peak, where the ball travels the distance without the drift or drop drop that telegraphs a throw's limitations, where it arrives with the same energy it left with. That is arm talent. That is the physical gift that makes a quarterback worth committing to. And Sanders has been showing it in an environment where, critically, he is not even close to his ceiling yet. That last point is where I want to spend some time, because I think it is the piece of this story that is most underappreciated in the broader conversation. The OTA and minicamp structure, the no pads, no contact, controlled repetition format of spring practices, is genuinely not the setting where Sanders' game operates at its highest level. Everything documented about how he competes, from people who studied his college tape most carefully to people who watched him in the competitive moments at the end of last season, points to a quarterback whose instincts become sharper when the pressure is real. When the pass rush is live and coming with actual intent. When the defensive coordinator is running schemes designed to expose his tendencies rather than structured repetitions designed to build confidence. When there are real consequences attached to every throw rather than a controlled environment designed to let quarterbacks find their rhythm safely. He is a gamer. Not in a casual sense, in the specific football sense of a competitor whose best performance emerges when the moment demands it rather than when the environment manufactures comfort for it. The stakes go up, the resistance becomes genuine. The competitive fire that drove some of his best moments against Pittsburgh and Cincinnati at the end of last year gets fully engaged, and something activates in his game that you cannot fully replicate when nobody is hitting anybody, and the reps are designed to be fair and predictable. So hold that in mind when you consider what is actually happening right now. In a setting structurally not suited to his strengths, in the environment least likely to produce his best football, Sanders is already the acknowledged leader in a competition that the people covering it are calling genuinely open. What does that mean for what comes next? What happens when the Buffalo Bills joint practices arrive and the pass rushers are coming off the line with real intent and the secondary is physical and pressing and the competitive environment he historically thrives in is suddenly fully active? I think about that question seriously, and I think the answer is something the AFC North has not fully reckoned with yet. I want to be honest about Deshaun Watson, because I think intellectual honesty is the only approach that actually serves anyone trying to understand this clearly, and because Watson's situation this spring is genuinely more complicated than some of the coverage has captured. The reports about him have been more positive than many people expected coming in. His footwork looks worked on. His arm, coming off the Achilles recovery that cost him the entirety of last season, appears healthy. He has been making throws, connecting with the veteran receivers, building the kind of chemistry that the spring schedule exists to create. None of that is trivial. A quarterback with Watson's talent level operating at something approaching full health is a real NFL asset, and I will not dismiss what he has shown this spring because dismissing it would be dishonest. But here is where the honest conversation has to go, and where I believe the people around this organization have been going privately for weeks and are now beginning to say publicly. With Watson, the concern has never been about the talent. Nobody watches his tape or tracks his career and questions whether the physical ability is there. The concern, the persistent and evidence-backed concern, is about the pattern. What happens when the controlled environment ends? What happens when the structured, confidence-building spring gives way to the physical demands of real NFL weeks compounding over a full season? The history here is not ambiguous. Controlled settings, the spring practices, the early training camp work before pads and intensity arrive have consistently shown Watson at or near his best. And then the real competition begins. The opposing coordinators have film, the physical toll starts accumulating, and the performance has not matched the spring. That pattern exists across multiple situations. Asking people to watch him throw in shorts during minicamp and conclude that a full NFL season after 2 Achilles ruptures on the same tendon will unfold differently from what the documented history shows, that requires optimism the evidence simply has not earned. The organizational context surrounding all of this is something I keep coming back to, because it is completely different from anything Sanders has operated in since arriving in Cleveland, and I think it fundamentally changes how we have to interpret what we are watching. Under the previous regime, the quarterback evaluation process last year was documented by multiple reporters with first-hand access as not being genuinely open. Joe Flacco ended up starting games without having received the meaningful first-team reps during training camp that a real competition would have required. The depth chart operated as if conclusions had been reached before the process was given a chance to produce them. Sanders was being evaluated on a scale with weight already on one side before anyone threw a single snap. That was not something manufactured by critics. That was reported. That was confirmed. That was real. The regime is different now. Todd Monken is running this competition, and the observers covering it have been consistent in describing an environment where the rep distribution is genuinely even and the evaluation is legitimately open. For the first time since Sanders arrived, he is competing on a level surface, no organizational predetermination. No structural advantage protecting a conclusion that was reached before the process ran. And on a level surface, after weeks of spring work, the evidence points to the same place it has been pointing with increasing clarity. He is the leader. The previous setup required a structural advantage to prevent that outcome. Remove the structural advantage, run a fair competition, and the result that emerges is the one the evidence supports. The receiver room is something I have watched carefully throughout this process because I think it matters enormously for understanding what Sanders is actually working with and what this offense could become. The drop issues in the early OTA sessions were real and worth tracking, honestly. A quarterback can make perfect throws and still be undermined by a receiver group that cannot consistently secure the ball, and the early report suggested that was a genuine concern. What I can tell you now is that the conversation around drops has quieted noticeably as camp has progressed. Wallace catching the touchdown cleanly, Boston making plays on the throws that have been circulating, the younger receivers competing for roster spots, bringing the urgency that tends to clean up concentration issues faster than coaching ever could, because the cost of a breakdown is not just a lost rep, but potentially a lost roster spot. Even the conversation around Jerry Jeudy, who has been a question mark in various ways, has shifted in a somewhat more encouraging direction recently. I will not tell you the receiver situation is fully resolved until I see it translate consistently in live game action. Practice is practice, and games are games, and that distinction is real and meaningful, especially for a group that has had issues with concentration and consistency. But the direction is better than it was. If this receiver room gets its hands right, if the talent that is clearly there starts showing up in execution on a consistent basis, then what Sanders is operating with becomes a genuinely different proposition from what Cleveland fielded last year. The offensive line investment at pick 9, 2 receivers taken in the top 40 of the draft, a system being specifically designed around Sanders' strengths by a coordinator who understands what he is working with, a receiver room trending upward. Put all of that together with a quarterback who is already leading this competition in an environment that is not even his most natural one, and the ceiling this offense could reach is something Cleveland fans have not had a legitimate reason to discuss seriously in a very long time. The Buffalo Bills joint practices are circled on my mental calendar in a way I do not think is getting enough attention in the broader conversation right now. Because if you want to understand where this competition actually gets resolved, not officially resolved in terms of a front office announcement, but resolved in the way that matters most, resolved on a field against real competition with real stakes, it is going to be those joint practices. The Bills are not showing up to hand anyone an easy afternoon. Their secondary is physical and talented, and genuinely difficult to move the ball against when they are engaged. Their pass rush has real depth and real intent. Their defensive coordinator is going to arrive with a scheme designed to expose whoever is taking snaps against them. That is not a controlled OTA setting. That is as close to real NFL football as either of these quarterbacks gets before the preseason games begin. And in that setting, the gap between what Watson has shown in spring and what he has historically been in live competitive environments becomes visible. In that same setting, the version of Sanders that activates when the pressure is real, when the edge rushers are coming off the line with actual intent, and the coverage is not giving anything away for free, is fully engaged rather than partially contained by a spring environment that limits how much of his game can express itself. Mandatory minicamp runs June 9th through the 11th. 3 days where the intensity increases, the media access expands, and the evaluation reaches its peak before training camp arrives. Everything that has been building through this entire offseason, every practice report and every press conference signal and every organizational investment in the infrastructure around this quarterback converges into this window. And the player entering that window as the acknowledged leader, acknowledged by the voices that had every reason not to acknowledge him, is the one who has been here from day one of voluntary work, building connections and rhythm and chemistry, one repetition at a time through every stage of the process. I want to be clear about what the stakes actually are here, because I think they sometimes get flattened into roster decision language when they are something bigger than that. The quarterback Cleveland starts week 1 of the 2026 season shapes what the next several years of this franchise look like. The roster has been rebuilt around specific assumptions about who is going to be taking snaps, the offensive line investment, the receiver draft capital, the scheme Monken is installing. All of it was constructed with a quarterback profile in mind, and the quarterback whose profile matches that construction is the one leading this competition right now. Get this right, and Cleveland has something real to build on. Get it wrong, and the window that this roster construction created closes without producing what it was capable of producing. That is the actual weight of this decision. What I keep coming back to, sitting here on June 2nd watching this unfold, is the specificity of what is being reported. The coaching acknowledgement around Sanders has not been diplomatic or generic. It has been specific. Specific about placement, specific about processing speed, specific about the execution on particular throws in particular moments that separate a quarterback who belongs from a quarterback who is taking over. That specificity is what separates noise from signal, and the signal, coming from the people in the best position to evaluate it, and the people least motivated to arrive where they are arriving, is pointing clearly in one direction. Training camp is coming. The Bills are coming. The preseason games are coming. The evaluation is reaching its most critical phase, and the quarterback doing something real in Berea right now is going to be right there when all of it arrives.